Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. Today we're listening to Murder Under the Friday Night Lights. And this is Where is Tom Brown?
Canadian Texas. It's everything you think of when you think of a small town. And of course, it has Friday night football.
Well, we've got about 31 minutes before we kick this Regional 1 semifinal game off. Before we take another quick time out, I want to say that we come on the air tonight with some troubled hearts.
But then the background, something dark and profound is going on.
No one disappears from Canadian Texas.
He just vanished.
I was scared, and I just thought, I can't lose anybody else.
There's a killer among
Our belief is we are investigating a homicide at this point. If you're a student at Canadian High School, you need to be charged with a crime for withholding information.
We're all kind of going, we don't trust any of you now.
Somebody knows what happened to Tom Brown. Somebody surely knows.
I was in town because we were on Thanksgiving break out of school, and I was excited to see Tom. We had planned, don't remember what movie we were going to watch, but we had planned to watch a movie when he got home on Thanksgiving Eve. But, he didn't want to do that. That was boring. We'd been in the house all day, so he needed some social time.
Thomas left my house at about 6:15, 6:20 to go hang out with friends, which was completely normal, especially on, a night that we would not have school the next day.
The last thing I said was, I'll see you later. There was nothing abnormal, nothing out of the ordinary. It was just, I'll see you later. What you do around here is drive around and listen to music with your friends. That's what he told me he was going to go do.
It was Tom, Christian Webb, and Caleb King all in the vehicle together. Tom had a very defined loop that he liked to drive, and it was out towards the Canadian Bridge.
We'd go out a little ways out of town, and then we'd turn on a county road.
We would pass by a few friends' houses on the way. We would turn at the football stadium.
And come back towards town out another direction.
Thomas had a curfew of midnight, 12 o'clock. Thomas had never broken curfew. So when he wasn't home by 12 o'clock, it did worry me because that just didn't happen for him. So then I texted him, hey, where are you? It's, past your curfew. You need to get home.
We didn't get any messages. And so I called him, and it got sent a voicemail.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging system. 806.
Then I texted him again, and I noticed after my second text that it was not delivered. That was more alarming to me because teenage kids are not going to turn a phone off.
I remember looking on the dot at 12:13, and I thought, something's weird. I said, I'll go see, if, he's just talking somewhere, just a little long, and I'll go tell him to come home. My biggest fear, though, is that we might not find him in time to save him if he'd gotten in a car accident.
I called Caleb King's mom because I wasn't sure if he was there. She woke Caleb up because he's in bed asleep. And Caleb also called Christian at her house. The last time Christian and Caleb saw Thomas was about maybe 11:15, 11:20, when they had gone back to the middle school parking lot and had gotten, into their individual cars, and they were all headed home. Christian and Caleb were pretty shocked that he did not show back up at the house.
I was filled with dread, really, and that's kind of when I started to panic and think maybe something went utterly wrong. Just a few years before that, I'd lost my grandmother, and I just thought, I can't lose anybody else.
Everyone in town knew Tom. He had a very outgoing, lighthearted, funny personality.
Thomas was the class president for 2 years. I mean, he was just a big kid, just a big lovable teddy bear almost.
Tom really, he loved football. Canadian is much like any other small town in Texas. Football is king. Every other young boy's dream is to grow up to be a Canadian Wildcat football player. Tom, he was a starter his senior year, and he was ecstatic.
Texas football, that's the only way to do, high school football on Friday nights. It's the thing to do. It's the place to be.
The stadium in Canadian has seats for 3,000 people, which is 300 more than the entire population of Canadian itself.
Thomas had won 2 state championships. He was good enough to play on the offensive line.
One of my fondest memories was winning the state semifinal football game on our way to the state football game that year. And me and Tom, we hugged each other and embraced. I was so pumped about it. Not many people get the chance to make it that far. That's pretty awesome. But about midway through his senior year, Tom was replaced. It was kind of a game time decision. Our coach felt like he could trust this other player more than he could Tom. He was devastated by it.
He decided that he didn't want to be on the team anymore, and he quit.
After he left the football team, I really didn't know who I would use to be my partner anymore. It was weird not having him there.
I called the sheriff's department at about 2:15 or 2:20. It was about an hour and a half, I guess, after I called them before they showed up at my house. It was Deputy Pine Gregory. I was surprised that it took so long. It's a small town. It takes about 10 minutes.
I asked the deputy if I could ride with him, and I would show him some of the places Tom hung out, where he might be. I was getting hysterical. I was anxious, and I was scared.
They drove around, I'm not sure how many hours.
Eventually he said, I'm going to take you home. I'm going to go off duty. Sheriff Luce will be on in a few hours.
One of the biggest traditions in Canadian football is to have practice on Thanksgiving morning. This was a real short practice, short run through, and I remember we were in our huddle, and Coach Kenny came up and told us, he goes, be on the lookout for Tom. He didn't come home last night, and nobody's heard from him or seen him.
I was at Alexander's, our local grocery and deli, getting a Coke, as usual. And, everybody was talking about it. It doesn't take long to find out something in Canadian. Thomas is missing. We had people that, were willing to do whatever to try and find Thomas. That's what we do.
Lots of community members started gathering to begin to search.
They had four-wheelers, they had horseback, they had people driving around.
So I was trying to be hopeful and not go to the worst case scenario, but I did not know what to think at all. It's a helpless feeling.
Christian and her dad are pilots. He flies helicopters. They went up and they were flying over the county. They're the one that spotted Tom's car.
Sheriff Lewis receives a call with a big development. A car had been found. The sheriff and his people immediately respond.
It was a Dodge Durango. It was red. All the football boys have their cars decorated. Thomas did have writing on his car from the beginning of the year, Go Cats. So they knew that it was Thomas's car.
They found it by sewage ponds. It stinks out there. Nobody hung out down there.
It was just like Thomas had driven up and parked it, except that he wasn't there.
There's absolutely no sign of Tom at all. Tom has vanished.
Chris and Ken, weekday mornings.
It's as American as apple pie.
98.3 KXDJ.
Every weekday morning, the people that live east of the Panhandle turn into a little radio station that is hosted by a local DJ named Chris Samples. He's an old-fashioned town crier that lets everybody know what's going on in town.
Do I understand correctly that the young man's vehicle was found abandoned near your water treatment plant facility? Is that correct?
That is correct. We've got the Randall County Sheriff's Posse down here, search and rescue team. They are on horseback searching.
The investigation was led by Nathan Lewis, the sheriff of the county. He was a young man who had just been elected, had been in office for only a couple of months.
They begin looking around and they get inside the vehicle, which is open.
His wallet, keys, cell phone, all of that stuff was gone.
There was a small smear of blood, which turned out to be Tom's blood, on the door handle of the driver's side door. On the floorboard was found a .25 caliber bullet casing.
It's Texas, so everyone has a gun, but not Tom, because Tom didn't like guns. So not something I would expect him to have his hands on.
They find little pieces of evidence, intriguing, mysterious, but there is no sign of Tom whatsoever.
We had a pack of bloodhound dogs in here that's what they do every day. They track scents, and we tracked him east of where the vehicle was found, and they'll come up to a dead end at that point. As soon as the bloodhounds got to the actual water marsh, they lost the scent.
The clock is ticking, and you're just kind of waiting on them to find Tom.
They told us there was nothing for us to do. We just trusted the law enforcement to do what we felt like they needed to do.
I really tried to stay on the positive side of it. I tried to stay away from the thought that he was dead at all, because nothing bad happens here.
Chris, we've had a numerous amount of people over here helping us, and this young man's picture, Bolo, the teletypes, is on the front of their computer screens. And so, law enforcement community, if you will, is just tremendous.
I would say 5 o'clock on Thanksgiving Day, the sheriff brought Thomas's car to my house. I said, "You're telling me that you've already processed the car?" "Oh yeah, we don't." It was pretty shocking.
We thought, well, it's a little odd because when you impound it, you have that to fall back on if you need to do forensics later.
want to say that we come on the air tonight with some troubled hearts, thinking a lot of the Brown family and thoughts and prayers with you guys. We will be hoping for the best and put this in God's hands.
Well, that Friday at the Wildcat game, the crowd was very subdued.
What happened? You know, what happened? What happened? Where was he? This is crazy.
I was struggling. Tom had always been the person who had told me, like, you gotta do what you gotta do, make it happen, do your best. So I went and I did my best. But I had just got a feeling that things were not gonna end up the way we wanted them to.
I was like, man, I'm gonna play this for Tom because he was very important to me. I was scared that maybe he wasn't coming home.
No one disappears. I mean, not from Canadian Texas, you know. I mean, into thin air, apparently.
Within a few days, I was very concerned about how the investigation was going, and I was so concerned about it that I went to the sheriff's office. And he said to me, when we found the car, I just thought that Thomas committed suicide like your dad had. My mom was a teacher at Canadian High School, and Sheriff Nathan Lewis was a student when my dad committed suicide. I guess he thought that it had been passed down through the family. I was very angry with him when he said that, but it just didn't seem like something Thomas would do. He did not seem depressed. After he quit football, you know, the first week or so was kind of hard, but he decided to turn his attention to theater because that was really something that he liked to do a lot. And he was about to start the fall production for theater or drama, and he was very excited about it. Plus, I didn't know how it could be a suicide if you don't find the body of the person who committed suicide. And I had tried to let the sheriff do his job, but I was apprehensive because we did not get off on the right foot. About a year and a half before Thomas went missing, Nathan Lewis and I had an incident. He's a deputy coming in off duty one night, and Thomas had been downtown hanging out with some kids. And he stops them and accuses them of trying to break into a theater on Main Street. He singles Thomas out of the group. You need to get in my car. And the whole time he's using swear words, the F word a lot. And he proceeds to question Thomas in the car about what he's been doing that evening. And Thomas tells him, he goes, I'm on my way home. Eventually, he lets Thomas go home.
My mom and I questioned him numerous times. You know, did you break in there? I mean, was the stop justified? He said, no. Our friend lives above it. We didn't break in, and so we said, okay.
I did have to talk to the sheriff's department. I just think that Lewis was mad at me because I called him out for stopping my son.
Well, fast forward to Tom's disappearance, and the last cop that Penny wants investigating the disappearance is Lewis, because she thinks Lewis has a bias against her own son.
I was so upset that I started asking some friends about private investigators, and one of them had given me Philip Klein's name. He specialized in missing persons, missing children.
One of her comments to me was, we need you. This sheriff doesn't know what he's damn well doing. Please, please, please help us. She had me at the first please. I packed my bags and I was headed to Canadian.
Thomas Brown was last seen just hours before Thanksgiving Day, and since then, the story of his disappearance has captured the attention of people in and around the Texas Panhandle.
A few days after Tom's disappearance, Philip Klein arrives in Canadian in his big black Suburban, pulls up to the sheriff's department. Klein was a big, bold, bombastic, opinionated, hard-hitting private detective. He introduced himself to Sheriff Lewis and says, "I'm Philip Klein, and I'm here to solve the Tom Brown case."
First thing he started talking about was suicide. Well, Tom killed himself.
I just thought that was BS from the beginning. He would have been upfront with people because he loved us and he respected us and he didn't want people to worry about him.
I interviewed some of his friends, from his ex-girlfriend Sage to his good friend Christian, other boys that knew him, who said that Tom would occasionally get melancholy. But I'd always ask, did it feel like he was acting suicidal? And they would say no.
Christian and Caleb, the friends with him that night, they just said it was a normal night, that they went and drove around. Thomas was funnier than he had been in a long time. You know, he was just rolling with jokes. You know, his character was at a high. Tom had never once mentioned to me that he was depressed or anxious, that he wanted to end his life.
Lewis immediately distrust Klein. Lewis saw Klein as this overly opinionated figure who came to conclusions before he had the evidence to back those conclusions. Klein saw Lewis as a rookie who didn't know anything about investigations, who was just getting in his way. So Klein begins to do his own investigation. And then within a month after Tom's disappearance, Sheriff Lewis made an appearance on Chris Sample's radio show. And he said that the most likely theory was that Tom had been hitchhiking or was picked up by someone and disappeared from Canadian, left the town altogether.
I will say that most of everybody has been interviewed by somebody. What we are coming up with by these interviews is going back and determining that the young man did leave voluntarily. We're going to do everything and still do everything we can to locate him and bring him home.
A workman for the local power company, checking some electric lines, was walking through an area off of Lake Marvin Road, and he came across a backpack, which had books in it and a laptop and was sitting perfectly in an upright position. It was Tom's backpack.
The backpack had been there for a while. It was wet. Inside the backpack were some of his school papers and notebooks, and his laptop. The laptop was sent to a forensics lab. All it had was his schoolwork on there. The laptop had not been used since Thomas disappeared. The sheriff told me that he thought Thomas left it there. That is not what I believe.
From that parking space where that Durango was found to where the backpack was found by air would have had to be 5, maybe 6 miles, somewhere in there. You got to walk through rugged terrain.
Tom wasn't an outdoors person, and that night it was really cold.
You cannot walk across the Canadian River. I mean, you cannot cross the river bottom by foot.
If he was committing suicide, why would he do that? Had someone abducted Tom and taken the backpack and put it on the other side of the fence so that no one could find it? It was just another one of these little mysteries in a story that was getting more and more mysterious all the time.
We started thinking there's more to this case going on than a young man that has just simply disappeared. I brought a cadaver dog and one of the best trainers in the United States on cadaver dogs to Canadian. Remember, the dog doesn't hit on tracking a person. It tracks on human death scent. When you die, immediately your body releases a scent. That dog hit all over that car. There was a dead body in the car. We asked them, can we run the dog on the backpack and see if it'll hit? Why y'all want to do that? They would not allow us to get close to the backpack. Now, that doesn't tell you something. Nothing does. We finally look at each other and go, we're getting blocked by the cops. What in the hell's going on?
Klein begins to get suspicious. He began to think, could there be a murder going on here that's getting covered up? And so his suspicion began to drive his investigation.
Last time we spoke, the backpack evidence had just been unveiled, and that was very suspicious to you.
Everybody wants to talk about a guy that's running away. He never used his credit card. He hasn't used it. And he had no cash on him. You don't have your car. We know he's not a runner. The big question is why was the backpack out on Lake Marvin Road? Was it thrown there? Was it placed there? Our team is investigating this as a homicide. Our phone lines lit up like crazy.
Plenty of rumors started up. Things started to get a little heavier online.
There were rumors that someone had killed him and put his body into a wood chipper and scattered the remains. The speculation just went crazy. The pressure on the great people of Canadian is growing. Banners that would go up would declare, there's a killer among us.
I cannot explain how many rumors were going through town after Tom Brown disappeared. The rumors about Sheriff Lewis were just almost insane. He had some kind of gay love ring going, that he was selling Tom as a sex slave to sex traffickers from out of town. Completely unfounded, completely untrue, and defamatory.
It's all a big blow up now. This one says this, one says this one says this. That kind of split the town. Either you were for the sheriff's office or you're against the sheriff's office.
I say this, she's missing her son, and I understand that. Like I said, it's very emotional for her. I mean, people talk gossip and the gospel. You're always going to have critics. Most of them don't have a clue what they're talking about or don't know anything about this case. I don't feel bad for myself or anybody up here when those rumors are said, because we all know the truth of it. I don't feel like we have to say anything against it.
Finally, I just said, quit listening to the sheriff. What does your gut tell you? We were told that there was a massive search that was done in the area where the backpack was found. Then we started finding the ranger that was out there. He said, we didn't do a line search. I mean, I beat my fist on the table 5 or 6 times. His body's right there. So I organized a search on Lake Marvin Road for Tom Brown's body.
On October the 13th, there's a little bit of welcome to good news when the Canadian Wildcats won a big game over the Childress Bobcats. The next day, some 150 volunteers gathered together on Lake Marvin Road to search for Tom.
I was listening to all the radio traffic of all of our people, directing people, and that sort of thing. And they called me and said, hey, you need to come back up here to mile marker number 1. We found a phone. It was a rose-colored cell phone. And everybody looked at it and goes, it's in pristine condition. And I said, it fell off of somebody's car, or it's one of the searchers' phones. It was sent out to Quantico. According to the FBI, it was Tom Brown's phone. And that's when we all kind of looked at each other and went, oh my God, what the heck?
It had not been sitting out there for nearly a year. There had been rainstorms, ice storms, mowers going over that area, and the phone was untouched. It looked like it had just come out of the box and had fallen to the ground. If you thought the backpack evidence was mysterious, the discovery of Tom's iPhone is even more mysterious.
It didn't take long for that rumor mill to start. How did it get there?
The speculation is that if somebody has ditched this phone, I think that Sheriff Lewis thought Klein did it. There are people that believe that was plausible.
I think that since the sheriff's department knew where the search was, that someone in the department put the phone out there to try to put the phone into evidence. Since the night he went missing, they kept asking me for that passcode. You don't need it unless you have the phone.
We're dealing with an insider job. We're dealing with an internal thing. Somebody that's in a high place in law enforcement.
I know wholeheartedly that there's nobody in this department that would ever do something like that. We took the case as it come in, and we've done a heck of a job with it. I've had the Texas Rangers and FBI involved in the disappearance.
And then shortly thereafter, Mr. Klein comes on my radio program and says quite the opposite. Those men do not like each other at all. They did not respect one another. And it is still ugly to this day. I have a hard time with conspiracy theories. Some of this suggested stuff really casts dark shadows on Hemphill County law enforcement. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think the Texas Rangers are in the business of covering up for small town law enforcement agencies, are they?
No, absolutely not. But every case takes this twist and turn.
I decided to post a petition on our Facebook page called Moms for Tom to petition the Attorney General's office to get involved and take over Thomas's case. I believe that Thomas's disappearance is a cover-up of something.
So at the beginning of 2018, myself and another investigator named Chris Smith started visiting Canadian to figure out what exactly had happened to Thomas and try to determine who had possibly placed the phone outside just before Philip Klein's search. And it was determined that we would like to polygraph Penny Meek. Once Tom Brown's phone was discovered in pretty much near perfect condition, the OAG determined it was likely that somebody was in possession of Tom's phone since he had disappeared in 2016. So we started steps in trying to determine who that could be. You're always going to use every investigative tool available to you, and one of those tools is a polygraph. We first tested the mother, Penny Meek, in relation to questions about the phone. Penny Meek showed deception on her polygraph. The AG's office could not substantiate her claims that the sheriff's office had asked Penny Meek for the passcode to Thomas's phone.
Penny Meek had in fact asked one of Tom Brown's friends for the passcode to Tom's phone.
Why would Penny want to be inside Tom's phone so quickly? Did that mean she had the phone? And if she did have the phone, that would mean she knew something about where he was the night he disappeared.
But Sheriff Nathan Lewis also showed deception on his polygraph in relation to questions about the phone.
It just completely baffled me. And so you added mystery upon mystery upon mystery.
Penny Meek has said that Sheriff Nathan Lewis was the first person to bring up suicide. However, in Penny's initial interview with law enforcement just a few days after Thomas went missing, when she's asked what she believes happened, she makes the statement that she thinks he committed suicide. We know that Tom had searched suicide hotline at approximately 9:11 p.m. on that evening. There's 3 entries on the phone, but ultimately we know that he did not call the suicide hotline.
One of the theories that allegedly got connected to Penny was that she was so upset, allegedly, over the suicide of her own father out by Lake Marvin Road that she couldn't handle the idea of her own son committing suicide. And so that she allegedly arranged for Tom's body to be taken away and hidden and left for years.
Penny Meek also showed deception on questions about Thomas's body.
They kept insisting that I had found Thomas and moved his body. That made me angry because that is not true. That's just a ludicrous, ridiculous, absurd theory. I don't know what parent would find their child in a situation like that and then you just walk away and leave them. I would stand before God himself and tell you that I have not seen Thomas since he went missing.
These lie detector tests are not court evidence, but they sure are suggestive that somebody's not telling the entire truth. In January of 2019, Sheriff's Deputy Pine Gregory, even though he was on duty, had taken an hour off to walk through an area near the entrance to Lake Marvin itself where he was looking for deer shed, which is the Texas way of saying deer antlers, because he collects them. He came across bones, a skull, a femur, assorted smaller bones.
The AG investigators showed up at our house and they told us that the remains did in fact belong to Thomas.
Nearly 3 years after Tom had disappeared, he finally had been found.
The remains could not give any determination for a cause or a manner of death.
Penny, does finding his remains and knowing for sure now that he's in his heavenly home help you sleep any better at night?
Not really, because I want to know what happened. I deserve to know what happened.
Family, friends, and community members overflow the Canadian high school gym, all paying their respects to a son, classmate, and role model, Thomas Brown.
It was a nice service, but it was really hard. It's just hard to talk about because it's just so hurtful that he's gone.
They had his Letterman jacket as well as his senior picture. I'll never forget the music they played. I have it on my phone, and I listen to it every once in a while just because it makes me think of Tom. I cried through the whole thing, just having to realize, like, this is confirmation, like, we lost Tom and the morning of that.
In August of 2019, we held a meeting with members of the Hemphill County Sheriff's Department.
What the Attorney General's report concluded was that Sheriff Lewis had nothing to do with the disappearance of Tom, with his death, and where his remains were eventually found.
Until proven otherwise, the only thing that Sheriff Lewis was guilty of is getting in over his head.
The conclusion is that there isn't a conclusion. We don't know what happened to Thomas Brown.
And you just shake your head and say, my God. My God. You really want to know my bottom line? Who the hell is going to stand up for Tom Brown?
I believe that Thomas was murdered. Maybe there's something bad going on with the sheriff. I don't know if he's covering for himself. It's hard. I cannot process what happened after that because I just don't know.
In her desperation and grief, you could see her grabbing hold of some of those theories. But there are a lot of people in town who think Penny is putting on a performance, that her grief is faked, or that she's not revealing what she really knows happened to Tom. But none of us really know. None of us are sure whether it's a performance or whether it's reality.
In Canadian Wildcat fashion, in 2020, in the middle of COVID, they win the state championship.
I do think it's helped with the healing. But a lot of us now are just anxious on a general basis, like who can we trust, who can we not?
This is just a strange case. I still ask myself what did happen. It is crazy that we cannot solve this mystery at all.
There's still a dark, looming cloud over Canadian. To me, the thing I miss most is the closest that we had. We're the only two that understood each other. And I'm afraid that I'm never going to have that again.
I just have to keep believing that someday I'll have answers. Maybe I don't hope that Thomas is coming home anymore. He's already home. But I can still hope that we have answers.
After all these years, after all these investigations, we're still sort of where we started. But somebody knows. Somebody knows the truth about this.
Ollie's a small, close-knit town in North Texas, and kids that play football here had a lot of pride in playing for the Ollie Cubs. But it's an interesting story there because I don't think they won a game.
We still love them. We still supported them every year, no matter what.
The city of Albany takes great pride in our school system and our football team. We have our school Cubs paw right here on our badge. So it's important that we protect the reputation of the school and of the town.
The body of an Albany High School teacher was found near Lake Cooper.
We drove down Main Street and we saw all this yellow tape wrapped around the house. So it was very, very wrong.
There was blood all over. I was in a police cruiser. That's about all I knew.
Every Friday we have hip rallies. Our band would come marching through the halls. Everybody will be clapping and cheering and everything else.
The Olney Cubs had probably a 10 to 12 year losing streak. Everyone expected them to lose, but they were kind of a lovable losers, I guess you could say.
There were a lot of losses, a lot of heartbreak. But it didn't stop everybody in town from coming out supporting the high school football team on Friday nights.
The town, they loved us. They would paint in the windows on Main Street. They would come to the games every day. The support from the town kept the team going.
2007, Manuela and I moved to Albany, and we were both teaching at the high school. Manuela loved being in the classroom and working with the kids as much as I did. We would usually go to every football game. Both my sons played on the team, Darian and William, and Melanie also played until she became a freshman. She was one of the best linebackers they had. We have always been proud of our children and everything they've done. Darian and William, and Kiara, and Melanie.
Manuela was just like any other true Olney resident and Cub fan. She would show out to the games and cheer on her Cubs.
She had a very annoying cowbell that she would take with her to football games and different pep rallies, and the kids always knew she was there.
It would literally blow my ear out. Almost made me go, I'm already hard of hearing. I don't need to go completely deaf. That Saturday, it was just a normal day for Manuela and me. Sitting on the couch watching TV. My son and my daughter, they were in their rooms. It was just a quiet evening. Manuela, she slept in the bed, and I fell asleep on the couch. After I'd woken up, I heard a little thump. That was it, just like that, and that was it. So I'm like, man, well, just a little noise. Old house. Sometime early morning, my daughter Kiara came in. Said, Dad, where's Mom? I said, probably the bedroom. And she goes back and comes back, said the door's locked. My wife never locked that door. I'm like, well, go around to the garage. Kiara goes, comes back in and goes, Dad, there's blood everywhere in there. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? There were bloody footprints all over the kitchen. There was blood going all the way down this hallway. When I walked through that bedroom, there was so much blood all over the floor. I actually stepped in one puddle of blood right by the computer desk. And I'm like, looking around for if she cut herself on something. What could she possibly have cut herself on that she bleed that much? And there's nothing. I went to the hospital here and said, is my wife here, so-and-so? And they said, no. So I came home and called the police.
Yes, 911, where's your emergency?
Describe it. My wife is missing. And there's blood all over her bedroom.
What's your name?
Peter Allen.
It was a Sunday. I started my patrol shift at 7 a.m. Olney, it's not a crime-ridden area. On Sundays, I was the only one working for the entire county. About noon, I was coming back through Olney, and I noticed the crime scene tape up all around Mr. and Mrs. Allen's house. And I thought that was really just struck me as odd. I was like, what could have happened? I knew the Allen family through my kids. My youngest daughter and my youngest son and Mr. and Mrs. Allen's daughter, Kiara, played sports together since elementary school. And I knew of Mrs. or Mrs. Allen as being teachers there in the school system. My son Wyatt, he was really close to Mrs. Allen. He adored her as a teacher. I pulled over and talked to one of the officers, and the officer asked me if I would go out to Lake Cooper to see if I could find this white SUV that was involved with the missing person, because that's where people would go here in town, out to Lake Cooper. It takes me about 5 minutes to get out there.
When I got by the boat ramp, I could see a white SUV on the other side of the lake by the dam. I'm like, okay, I'm a little bit more relieved. Okay, now I found the vehicle. Now, if there's somebody that needs some type of help, I can get them the help they need. Look at the vehicle. There's nobody around it. I verify the tag first.
28 is going to be Texas, Lincoln.
I call dispatch and tell Young County that I've located the vehicle. I put my rubber gloves on, I get my camera, I take a bunch of pictures of the vehicle from all angles. Inside, outside, the ground around it. Then I noticed some type of light brownish smears on the side of this white vehicle. And I've been in law enforcement long enough, I knew this looks like dry blood to me.
This vehicle is going to be unoccupied, and looks like it's been wrecked out.
I walk around the vehicle, there's nobody in the vehicle, nobody on the ground near the vehicle or in the ravines by there. I started walking up towards a fence line. I see what looks like material, clothing, whatever, in a pile. As you got closer, you could tell something was wrapped up in it. You could see the skin, the flesh. But I could see that it was a human.
Say a command or say help.
Call work 1.
Call work 1 at work.
Archer County Sheriff's Office. Hey, this is going to be the one he's looking for.
What?
Yeah.
Why Mrs. Allen? Why would anybody want to hurt Mrs. Allen?
When I first met Miss Allen, it was in her class. And she just went above and beyond to make sure I understood everything. And she really got through to me and touched my heart. Miss Allen and her husband, Mr. Allen, was my two favorite teachers.
Manuela was a special teacher because she was able to really connect with her students. She cared about what happened to her students after they left school. She would check on them and would follow up with them. And she would often have students come back and visit and let her know how they were doing.
Miss Allen in the hallway should have the biggest smile. She would greet everybody. She knew everybody's name. Everyone loved her. If you had a bad day and you saw Miss Allen, your day's made. It's already better.
Andrea was my soulmate from day one. I was a very closed off person, and when I fell in love with her, this was instant. I started to open up, and she showed me how good life could be when you love somebody. And she changed who I was as a person.
Whenever you show up at a crime scene, you start trying to put pieces together and try to make sense of how logically they would have come to be where they're at.
When we saw the Allen family after arriving, they were not necessarily, they didn't display a whole lot of emotion. That was a cause for concern, knowing that they were inside the house when whatever happened to Ms. Allen happened.
As we made our way back through the house and entered into the kitchen, we started noticing signs that there was a struggle. Blood was left on the walls, handprints. And as we walked through the hallway area, you could see blood on the carpet and around on the walls. And then we entered the bedroom. There's a pooling of blood in the carpet. And then there was a tremendous amount of blood splatter on the walls and the dresser that came from that area. It's still as vivid in my mind today as it was the day it happened.
Based on the marks on the wall and where the blood was pooled at the end of the bed, it appeared to me that she had tried to get up and get out of there.
I think there was an attempt where Miss Allen tried to escape, and she was dragged back into the bedroom. As we moved through the bedroom, there's a connecting laundry room that goes into the garage, and you could tell that somebody had gone through there and that there were drag marks through that area. I think that's at the point when we put two and two together that the vehicle was pulled around to move Miss Allen's body from the location of the incident. You could come to the conclusion that it was a crime of either passion or anger. So my instincts told me that the victim knew the killer.
It's just a devastating loss for the 4 children.
Julie Cooper on July 7th.
You have an educator that is so connected to the community and such a big part of her students' lives. You know that this is going to have a big impact.
I believe my first initial reaction was just complete disbelief. Like, this can't be happening. This not here. You know, this isn't real. But then it started to become more and more real.
We were keeping up with whatever news channel it was. They had posted that they had identified a body and that the body was Miss Allen. And that's when our hearts broke. I couldn't take it. I've had a lot of family members pass away, and this was one of the hardest because I would just consider as a family member.
What would you hurt a teacher who helped so much with every student out there, who makes sure you graduated, she cared for? It was just, why? Why?
It was just devastating. It hit hard. It just changed my outlook on everything. Some things will stick with you, some things will leave. This one will stick.
After we received a call from the deputy that he had located the vehicle and Miss Allen, you know you're going to have to notify the Allen family, and nobody wants to do that. That's probably one of the worst things in this job.
He says, well, we found your wife's car and we have a woman's body. And I said, you have a body? He said, yes. So you're telling me my wife is dead? The only thing I can tell you I felt at that point was empty. Just empty. Especially since I knew I had to tell my kids.
The murder of Manuela Allen really shook the town of Olney.
It had been a decade since the last murder had occurred here.
Problem with a small town, they'll support the football team, but also in a small town, you have a lot of rumor mill.
If there's anything that happens in the sweet little town of Olney, it's on Olney Rants and Raves.
If someone sneezes in Olney, you're going to see it on Rants and Raves.
A couple of weeks before this happened with Miss Ellen, there was a lot of robbery going on, So we maybe figured there was just a robbery. Somebody wanted to try to rob their house. But there was a lot of rumors just going around, back and forth. People were saying it was the husband who was involved, or the kids.
People were saying that it was Mr. Allen that did something.
Oh, it's got to be Mr. Allen. He was in the house when all this happened.
There's a lot of people who are actually scared. What's going on? We need information. There was fear in town that there was a murderer loose.
It's pretty common for small cities in the state of Texas to rely on the Texas Rangers to come in and aid us in these investigations.
The Texas Rangers that were looking at Lake Cooper had noticed there was a shoe print in the mud at the scene, and they also noticed that there was a bicycle imprint. And it just so happened that the way the moisture in the dirt is that it made a perfect imprint of that tire track.
At that point, they began to put together a scenario where perhaps whoever did this had somehow left the scene on a bicycle.
So that's one of the first, I would call it an aha moment, where you say, okay, well, maybe we're getting somewhere with this case. And so, there's an all points bulletin for a bicycle at that point in time.
We went to the autopsy. What we learned was Manuela Allen had sustained many stab wounds. The majority of the stab wounds were to the skull. It appeared that she had been putting her hands to her head in order to prevent the stabbing. And as a result, she sustained roughly 47 stab wounds. Further, it appeared that she had suffered some strangulation, and there was a post-mortem gunshot to her facial area.
There was no sexual assault. It was just a violent attack that involved, strangulation and stabbing. Everything that they were able to pull and show, Ms. Allen fought hard.
Ms. Allen died a horrible death.
At 10:30 a.m., the Texas Rangers put me in a police car in the front, no cuffs, no nothing like that, and drove me down to the Young County Sheriff's Office and put me in an interrogation room.
I don't know that, but somebody came in. She put up one hell of a fight, I'll tell you.
Mm-hmm.
She's where there was blood, and it looked like there was a firearm attack. What it looked like to me.
Yeah.
But then if she bled that much, she could have been kind of silly for not having blood. And then it was like something to wipe it on the door, but none of that makes sense to me, because then why would she? There's blood on the outside of the door. And then there's blood and all. I don't know. Nothing makes sense to me.
We learned a great deal about the Allen family, mainly through the interviews. We got sort of a picture of where everyone was, what was going on, the early morning hours of Sunday the 7th when this occurred. The older daughter, Melanie Allen, she had gone with a friend to Arlington to go to Six Flags, so she was not in town. And then the oldest son, he was in Stephenville attending school at the time. Mr. Allen was home. He was in the living room. His younger daughter, Kiera Allen, had come home at roughly 11:30 p.m. Shortly thereafter, the 18-year-old son, Darian Allen, had come home. So there were 3 individuals in the home. when this occurred at approximately 2 or 3 a.m.
What led to you sleeping on the couch last night? Somebody told me that you said that y'all had some type of disagreement or whatever last night. Now, is that normal that you sleep on the couch? Yeah. Okay.
My kids will tell you to sleep on the couch all the time.
There was a huge question as to how could this woman be stabbed this number of times and there be 3 people in the home that did not really hear exactly what was going on. The son said that he had earphones on and he was up all night. The daughter was also home and she also had earphones on and she reported not hearing anything. But of course, anyone in that home could have been a suspect.
I get DNA samples and fingerprints from everybody. The reasons for doing that was obviously every one of y'all will leave left.
And that's when you begin the process of looking into these people and their association with the crime and if they could be ruled out.
If I told you that somebody, I suspected it was somebody close to the family or close to your mother, whether it's a family member or not a family member, but close to her, who would you think that might be responsible for it?
No idea, because everyone knows my parents. I don't know who did it.
It was violent, and you could tell there was a very hard struggle inside that room. It's an obvious question. Why didn't you hear this?
I'll be honest with you, it sounds like it's somebody that had some type of relationship or something with her. And I'm sure it's kind of, you can see that, I'm sure, too, to a certain extent. Especially since you didn't wake up or anything in the middle of it. If there was a struggle.
The struggles can be quiet. It's a long way from the front of the house to the back of the house. This is an old house. And the way this house is built, all the walls are solid wood on the inside and the outside. And the house is pretty soundproof from the front to the back. There's nothing I heard but like one little thump one time, and I was just like, oh, well, it's just a little thump, no big deal. And then the only other thing I heard was, I heard the car start. I went and opened the door and looked, but by the time I got up and opened the door, the car was gone. So I was like, I don't tell my wife what to do. If she wants to go get a cup of coffee or go somewhere, I didn't know. So I wasn't going to try to stop her.
When we were talking to Mr. Allen, he had indicated that he was a heavy sleeper and that he had not heard that was going on 2 rooms away. So obviously that raises suspicion about his involvement in the case because the crime scene is so horrific. I felt like we needed to be careful how we spoke to Mr. Allen, the questions that we asked him, and that we needed to look at him as possibly being involved in this.
I mean, it could be somebody in the household. It could be you. It could be, you know.
I know you have to keep everybody open to suspect.
No, she didn't have anything to do with her.
No, I understand you got to do what you got to do. You understand, you find a person, I'm going to do what I got to do.
I don't see any scratch marks on your arms or on your face or anything. You don't have anything on your chest or anything like that.
No. If it was a fist fight with my wife, there'd be bruises, trust me. There was a whole lot of people that you could tell they thought I did it. As a school teacher, when they found out it was my wife, the school district put me on administrative leave. And I understand, because you wouldn't want somebody who might be a suspect in a murder teaching your kids. I understand.
Ms. Allen's family flew in from Germany during the course of this investigation. Law enforcement wanted to talk to them and say, hey, you know, what's their relationship like? Were they fighting? Was there anything going on that would have given y'all cause to believe that Mr. Allen had issues with Ms. Allen?
It was learned through the investigation that it's pretty common for Mr. Allen to sleep out on the living room couch and for Miss Allen to sleep in the bedroom.
They also were asked about his sleep, how deep of a sleeper he was. Every one of them to a T agreed that he was a very hard sleeper and he could sleep through a lot of noise.
So initially, whenever we did go into the house, we did see footprints and blood, and obviously those become an important factor.
They were able to compare Peter Allen's footprints to the footprints in the house.
The footprints, that's about a size 10, 9.5, 10. My foot's an 11 wide. No way it matches.
They were actually able to rule out Peter Allen's footprint. They were ultimately able to rule him out as a suspect. And they also were able to rule out their children because of all the DNA and footprints.
I don't feel angry about the interrogation. That doesn't bother me because I know they're just trying to do their job and trying to find the person who did this. But I had no idea it would kill my wife.
A couple of days after we had been at Lake Cooper, where the body had been disposed, we learned that there was an oil field worker who had been out on the job site very early in the morning and observed a male on a bicycle riding back toward Alney.
The guy had a backpack and I believe he had shorts and dark shoes.
Also, a woman had reported that she was coming back through that area, and she also saw a man on a bicycle, somewhat matching the same description, headed towards town very early in the morning. The investigators sought search warrants for the video surveillance from a bank over there.
And lo and behold, they had a video of a guy with a backpack on a bicycle, matching the description that they'd been previously given.
One suspect they were looking at was a Corey Taylor, a young man that had committed a burglary of habitation, and during that he stole some firearms and guns from a home of a gentleman. There was some concern that that could have been the purpose for the burglary into the Allen home. Mr. Allen had described many, many firearms which he had in the home.
I was called and asked if I would come to Alney and pick up a juvenile that they were interested in talking to. It's a 2-story apartment complex with a stairwell that takes a turn and goes up a different direction. And there's that cubby hole down there. I just happened to see a dirt bike. There was a bicycle track that was found in the dirt out there at the crime scene. The tread looked like it matched the tread that I had seen that had been taken from the crime scene at the lake. I wasn't sure, but it felt right.
Deputy Burbeck asked Mr. Taylor whose bike it was, and he said it's Julius Mullins.
Julius was actually a student at Olney High School where my wife taught.
Julius Mullins was a running back for the Olney Cubs. What I remember him as is a good kid. He played football, and just like any other normal kid.
Julius Mullins was a strong kid, fast, hit hard, everything we needed. He was funny, hot-headed sometimes. Everyone knew who Julius was, and all the teachers knew who Julius was. I got along with him. I don't know of a kid who didn't get along with Julius.
I first learned about Julius Mullins being a suspect as a rumor on Rants and Raves that they were seeking him as an active interest in the case. I was kind of shocked, because I'd talked to him, quite a few times at games, and he seemed like a nice, normal kid.
When I saw on Rants and Raves about Julius, a lot of people were questioning why would somebody like him do this. And Miss Allen, his own teacher, Julius had been known to have an unstable home life to the point where the athletic director and the coaches had allowed Julius Mullins to sleep on occasion, shower on occasion in the high school gym.
Oh, I met him several times. My daughter Melanie dated Julius for about a year or so. Honestly, we didn't really want them staying together, me and my wife, because one time my daughter had walked in and she had bruises on her arm. I'm like, what's going on? And she finally admitted that he had punched her in the arm a couple times. And that's when I told him, you want to fight? You can do it with a real man in the front yard. Let's go. She don't ever touch my daughter again. And he didn't. And she finally broke up with him in December or January.
Julius really liked her. And I think Melanie's like, all right, that's enough. And I don't think Julius really liked that. The week or month they broke up, that's when Julius started kind of like being more quiet, doing his own thing. He wouldn't show up to school. He would start hanging with like rough kids. And I remember they sat in class and he just leaning back, arms crossed, just real quiet. I was just, it's weird.
When the investigators spoke with Corey Taylor, he said that he knew that Julius Mullins had dated one of the Allen's daughters, and he felt that it was possible that Julius Mullins could have been involved in the murder of Manuela Allen.
I was thinking, no way, not Julius. I thought it was just someone just making something up. I didn't see any evil in him.
What bothers me about it is there's no way physically that he could have picked up my wife's body. My wife weighed in probably about 195, 200 pounds. He was 165 pounds. I don't see him doing that on his own.
After Julius Mullins' name came to the attention of the investigators, there was a witness that came forward that said that the day when all of the investigators were at Lake Cooper, that this gentleman had taken his family swimming and invited Julius Mullins to go swimming with them. Someone asked, what's going on over there? And Julius Mullins, before anyone had said anything about whose body that was, said, oh, they found Manuela Allen over there.
I was like, darn, that's it. Now you started having more confirmation that Julius Mullins may very well be the person of interest that we need to be investigating.
Shortly after the murder, Julius Mullins had been texting with his ex-girlfriend, Melanie Allen, Mrs. Allen's daughter, and he was telling her how sorry he was about everything that had occurred. And Melanie asked Mr. Mullins, he said, could you have been the one who had done this? Because the footprints in the kitchen showed him going straight for the keys, and you knew where the keys to the car were. He said, I wasn't involved. But I thought that was very sharp of Melanie to make that observation.
He knew the whole house layout. He knew that we always left the door into the garage unlocked. And she gave him the code of the garage and told him to just come in through the back door because it's always unlocked.
And then the DNA results returned, showing that the DNA all belonged to Julius Mullins.
It just all kind of started, the pieces started getting put together. So Julius was taken down to the sheriff's office.
We got good prints on the vehicle that was out there at the scene, and we know those prints were left by somebody that had blood on their hands. And we know that you were out there, but not only that, but
we know your shoes were out there. Not only that, but we know your bicycle was out there. I just want you to explain to me why all those different things are pointing toward you.
And he eventually took us through what happened that night.
So when you went in there, was she asleep? Which side of the bed was she on? If you were standing at the foot of the bed, looking at the wall, she was on the left? Okay.
During that interview, he gave very specific details about how Miss Allen was attacked.
You jumped on her in the bed, you stabbed her in the head. How many times do you think you stabbed her in the head? A bunch? And then she got up after that? She went to the door. How far did she make it? Did you close the door or did she close the door? So your bloody fingerprints are some of the ones on the door there.
It is mind-boggling to me that this child committed such a heinous crime. I do not know what happened. He said that he had been to this party where there were a lot of drugs before the offense. Then he changed his story during the same confession. He's not a truthful individual. I could speculate forever as to why Julie Smollins did this to Manuel Allen, but it defies humanity.
I don't know if you're ever going to have a why with Mr. Mullins. You can't say he had a bad family life. I don't agree with the proposition lack of money or anything like that. At the end of the day, he chose to turn into a murderer. Mr. Mullins just chose to throw humanity away.
Knowing I went to school with a kid who took a life, and then knowing that I played football with him, that's hard to take in. And like, me and him got along, like, we would high five, handshake, knowing that he was arrested for that. Of all the people, truly, it was this crazy news.
There was some thought that it would be quite difficult for this young man to be able to move her body from the bedroom to the vehicle and then from the vehicle to the final resting spot. But this young man was a football player, lifted weights, and I'm sure he was under a great deal of adrenaline rush. Who knows? But I ultimately believe that he murdered Manuel Allen on his own, as did the investigators.
She was a great teacher, a wonderful person, kind, loving, sweet, supportive, and she is what teachers should be like. She loved the kids and she would do anything to help them. She was a wonderful person. I missed my wife. I missed laughing with her, joking with her, holding her, kissing her, touching her. I missed taking walks around the block, holding hands. I feel empty inside half the time. Dead. He didn't just murder my wife, he murdered my family. My kids are still struggling with healing. I'll never get over it. I'll never move on. I'll move forward, but I can't move on.
The memorial that was held at the Olney High School auditorium for Miss Allen was just huge. So the town came out and just showed their love and affection for this glorious teacher that just touched so many people in the community.
I think a lot of people were still reeling from it and still wanting closure It was a traumatic event for Albany.
After Mullins was sentenced, what really helped the town move on, I think, is the Cubs actually started doing better. And the culture of Albany changed into that typical Friday night football town you would see.
With us actually winning games, going to playoffs, and breaking school records, I really think it boosts everyone's pride.
I still like to go out and support them and be there and cheer them on. So, yeah, we're glad that they're doing good.
Friday nights under the lights are a big deal in Shenandoah, Pennsylvania.
More than any other event, high school football unites our community.
Everyone played football, or everyone tried to play football. We were always competitive. We were always winning. But then the truth started coming out. Everything kind of went right downhill.
People were divided. I realized that I couldn't trust anybody.
Hey, these are the football players. They're allowed to do whatever they want. They're just untouchable.
That might be good, that might be bad, but it's the way it is in Schuylkill County.
I've lived in Shenandoah since I was about 7 years old. Everybody got along, and it's a small town vibe where everybody knows everybody. It's Friday night football. Sunday's supposed to be church and then with family, things like that.
The people in Shenandoah love block parties. Churches have them, sometimes fire companies have them. And that night in Shenandoah, there was one going on.
The Polish American always brings a good crowd to their block party, and there's always a good amount of people there every night. So you got pierogies, you got halushki. There's a mix of people. There was, whites, black, Mexicans. Everyone was getting along, having a good time. Little fun and games, bingo, stuff like that. Booze. That night, we're all hanging out at the block party, me and all the football players, so all the guys. They had boozed it up a little bit in the woods before they came to the block party. It was probably about 10 o'clock at night. It's my curfew, my time to go home. So I walked up the street. The guys walked down the street towards Vine Street Park. It's not a fancy park. It's just 2 basketball courts with a swing set.
Me and Luis, we spent the day together with the kids and stuff in town. And then we came home, and I had put the kids to bed. He told me he would be back that evening. He said he was going to be with his friend. And then he had called me and told me that he was on his way home. And I forget why, but for some reason I tried to call him right back, and it just kept going to voicemail.
I heard screaming. Very loud screaming. I looked out the window and I saw a crowd group of people, but I saw someone in the middle. He's getting beat pretty bad. I heard the thuds. It was just horrible. At that time, I grabbed the phone and I'm going out to the door. I got 911 on the phone, and I said, look, I said, someone's getting beat. Call for an ambulance. I hear people running, you could hear the sneakers on the road and stuff like that. I went over to him and I knelt down to him. Oh my gosh, it was horrible. You could tell I got kicked in the head. I could see him just laying there.
I'm sitting in my house after putting my children to bed, and next thing I know, my phone rings, and it's Luis's best friend, and he told me to get down there right away. I kept saying, why? What is going on? And he's like, he's on the ground, he won't wake up. And at first I thought they were joking around. And he's like, no, I promise, get down here, get down here.
When the Shenandoah police arrive on scene, the victim is laying on the asphalt, unconscious. He has severe injuries, trauma to his head. Officer Jason Hayes and Lieutenant Bill Moore responded to the scene.
I was still waiting for the ambulance to come. And when the police car came, I went over to him and I says, can you expedite the ambulance? This guy's been waiting for a while. Finally, the ambulance came up.
I just remember turning the corner and seeing blue and red flashing lights and a bunch of people. There had to be close to, in my head, it was like 30 to 50 people standing there. And I just happened to look down at the ground, and Luis was on the ground. I didn't know if he had just fell or if something bad, worse had happened. I didn't understand what was going on.
After EMS arrive on scene, they do transfer him from the scene to a hospital so they could treat his injuries. Luis is in very serious condition. They're trying to do anything to save him, which included removing a portion of his skull to ease the swelling on his brain.
When I first got to Geisinger Hospital, it was the early morning hours. The doctor explained everything to me, what was going on. So in my mind, I thought, okay, well, he'll be fine. He's not deceased. They're doing surgery now. He'll be okay. In that moment in time, I still didn't understand it. I don't think my mind let me comprehend it. When they finally brought him into the recovery room and they let me go in to see him, that was, I think, one of the hardest moments of my life, to see him like that. He was hooked up to all these machines. He wasn't answering me. He didn't move. He was there, but he wasn't there. So then I just sat with him, and I talked to him, and I held his hand, and I told him we loved him, and that the kids just wanted him to come home. And they told me that he had no brain activity, and that they were going to take him off life support. It seemed like it all ended within a matter of seconds, like he was gone.
The next day, I had about 50 missed calls when I woke up and 89 million text messages. Hey, what's going on? What did you do last night? Like this and that. A couple text messages I received that morning was, hey, somebody died last night. Did you kill somebody? So then, I'm in a panic. Like, what is going on? Somebody died last night. So on Monday, when I walk into the district attorney's office, my boss and the detectives are talking about the case. That's when I first learned
that witnesses have identified everyone that's involved is a football player from Shenandoah High School.
Derek Dunshaw, he played quarterback, played very well for the team that year. Brandon Bukarski, he played wide receiver. He had a very bright future ahead of him. Running back, Brian Scully, he was a good athlete. The following year would have been his year. Colin Walsh, he would be a junior that year. He was a wide receiver. He was one of the fastest kids on the team. Catch anything thrown at him. Knowing that the individuals involved were a major part of the football team was going to be impacted very severely. The guy died, so we thought they were going to get charged with, murder charge or something like that.
We heard that after Ramirez died, one of the responding police officers said, "There goes the football season." That's how important it was in the social consciousness. Cops are famous for gallows humor, but that stood out. Nobody appreciated the seriousness at the time of what had happened or the nature of the maelstrom that was going to descend on Shenandoah as a result.
A friend of mine called and he said, something's going on, something big's going on, can't talk right now, hang up. And that was all I got. So the way he said it and the way it came out, I knew something was going on.
The first time I heard about Luis Ramirez probably was over the police scanner. In Schuylkill County, everybody has their scanners. Police will call in and, they'll hear it over the radio, and that's kind of how rumors spread. It was just kind of, oh yeah, there was like a Hispanic man that was beaten up. There wasn't like a lot of details about what actually happened.
Luis came from Mexico, Iramuco, Guanajuato in Mexico. He came to Shenandoah wanting a better life. He was kind and funny. He tried to let everything just flow off his back. He was calm, relaxed, but he had a huge goofy side to him. Technically, my second two youngest are Luis's, but he raised my oldest daughter, Angelina, from the time she was 2 months old. We were actually friends for a little bit before he met her, but he had came up to my apartment and asked me if we could watch movies with her, and he just pulled her out of her playpen, and they just played, and I don't know, it took my breath away, and from then on, I was in love.
Shenandoah is an old coal mining town. It was about 1 square mile, and at one time 30,000 people lived there. As of now, Shenandoah has about 6,000 people. It was becoming increasingly populated by Hispanics. And I guess you could say there was some tension there.
I call it Shenandoah, but most people call it Shenandoah. Shenandoah is very big on things staying the same. And with people coming in from other countries, I guess a lot of them took it as if they were kind of like taking over. Me and Luis, we would talk about what we wanted for our kids and make sure that like we gave our kids the best life possible. Like a normal life in a normal family. But it was cut short.
We soon learned that the police did not interview football players right away. They were interviewed one at a time, and I believe some of them had a bigger gap in between their interviews. Brian Scully, one of the teens, wasn't interviewed until a few days after the incident. He says Luis Ramirez and one of his friends are on a swing in the park. And verbal exchange started, and Ramirez is irate and out of control and attacks them, and essentially they are defending themselves. Scully says Ramirez was the instigator, that there was no kicking, there were no racial slurs uttered during the incident, and lastly, that there was no alcohol imbibed by the teens that night. The story is that, we did everything right, that we were just, defending ourselves.
High school football is kind of like everything. It was everything to me. Our team was called the Shenandoah Valley Blue Devils. To play for Shenandoah Valley was always a big deal, and they were always competitive. We were always winning.
I was a high school football player at Marian Catholic. My sophomore year, we played Chenda. So I knew that Friday nights under the lights are a pretty big deal here in Schuylkill County.
High school football brings the community together in a way that no other sport does, and really no other event does in this town.
The town held the football team to a high standard. They always looked out for the guys in the football team.
There was a lot of the community who was like, there's no way they could be capable of this. They're our high school boys. They're our team.
The boys grew up, their parents lived here, their grandparents lived here, their great-grandparents lived here. They'll know not only if you played, but if your dad played football. That's how the boys were seen. The boys were the heroes. There was a sense that Mr. Ramirez was an outsider.
Everyone kept on saying, oh, it was just a fight gone bad. And saying, well, he didn't belong here, And if he wasn't here, he wouldn't be dead today. That's exactly what they were saying. Exactly what they were saying.
There's a very uneasy feeling everywhere you went. Some people were like, he was an illegal immigrant. He shouldn't have been here anyway. They were pretty supportive of the boys in town.
The people that were involved with what happened to Luis, I didn't know them. They were way younger than I was. The police officers, I knew them. The one I knew really well, Mr. Moyer, but I didn't know the other one, Mr. Hayes, that well. Officer Hayes brought me into the police station, and he told me that he was the only one trying to help me get answers, that if he found out anything, he would let me know right away.
That account that was provided by the teens, that there are no racial slurs, there's no kicking, and there's no booze involved. That account didn't match up with anything that an unbiased or third-party witness was saying. During the 911 calls, multiple witnesses saw an individual that was on the ground being kicked by multiple people.
According to the 911 callers who were seeing this and hearing bits and pieces of it as it was ongoing, there was a physical assault. This was very much 5-on-1, 6-on-1.
One of the individuals involved in the fight was verbally abusing Mr. Ramirez. And Mr. Ramirez, when he came at Brian Scully, walked basically into Colin Walsh, who threw a punch, knocking Luis Ramirez down on the ground.
There were eyewitnesses who saw the players kicking Ramirez repeatedly while he was on the ground. And they were about to leave. At that point, it's over. And a football player, what was described variously as like a soccer-type kick or a football punt, came up and kicked Ramirez in the head as hard as he could. The medical examiner testified later that the kick to the head at the end of the fight is what resulted in Ramirez's death. To those of us on the investigative team, we came to understand that as the coup de grace.
When I found out how he had gotten killed, I started to have nightmares.
And I just had a lot of trouble after that. I struggle with that still.
Kicking a defenseless individual in the head as they're laying motionless on the ground, that shows malice. This is murder.
There was a big question: who killed Luis Ramirez? Who delivered the fatal kick to the side of his head? Brandon Pekarsky, Derek Donchak, Colin Walsh, or Brian Scully?
At that point, the district attorney's office is working with the Shendo Police Department. We did receive the initial reports, which included written statements from eyewitnesses to what took place. So Ariel Garcia, one of the witnesses, wrote that someone, she couldn't identify specifically who it was, had kicked Luis in the head as he was laying on the asphalt. There were witnesses that said that after the incident, the teens, they run off into a park. And Eddie Nye, one of the witnesses, he's telling 911 where they're running off to.
I was there, and I was surprised because I would think there would be lights and sirens or something, but there was no urgency in any of the officers. They never asked me anything, if I identified anything, if I knew anybody, not what direction they went, nothing. I said, if you go down to the baseball field, you'll probably catch all of them, because I said they ran over the hill. And he says, just wait.
The police investigation was not done well. I don't think they really had any investigation that night.
And then we learned that Officer Hayes, who was one of the first officers to arrive on scene, was a de facto stepfather of one of the suspects, Brandon Pekarsky. Officer Hayes was involved in a relationship with Brandon Pekarsky's mother. And then we learned that the suspects had a really good relationship with Officer Moyer. They had known him for years because they played football with Officer Moyer's son.
The night of the incident, we found out the police officers had all the suspects stopped at Derek Donchak's house. He was the starting high school quarterback. The district attorney's office was amazed. It just wasn't proper police procedure.
The next day, there was another meeting at Brandon Pekarsky's house. The teens and their parents had a pretty good understanding of how bad Luis's condition was. They were scared. They wanted to protect each other. They formulated the specifics of the story that they were going to provide. We're going to tell them a story, but the story's not going to have boobs. The story's not going to have racial slurs. It's not going to have kicking. And Ramirez was the instigator in it. And, they stuck to that.
They could have filed charges that night. They didn't do that. And they let these boys have multiple opportunities to try and coordinate their story.
We had some difficulty in getting the Shendo investigative file. The DA had to actually write letters to the chief of police indicating that he needed reports from Officer Jason Hayes and Lieutenant Bill Moore. It took us approximately 3 weeks to get a full updated police report from the Shenandoah Police Department. The reports kind of blew us away because it was the first time that we had seen that, according to them, Ariel Garcia identified Brian Scully as the individual that threw the final fatal kick.
There are rumors going around that the police they're trying to pin it on Brian. The story for the fall guy was that he was going to be the one who kicked Luis Ramirez when he was down, and they were trying to pin that on him.
They meant to protect their own, meaning Brandon Pekarsky, because Jason Hayes was dating Brandon's mother. As I recall, Donchek's family's place in the community, they were well known and successful.
On or around August 5th, we asked Brian Scully to come in for a re-interview, and we essentially tell him that the gig is up. I mean, people have come clean and told us the truth. He says, if you're not going to believe me, you're not going to believe me. And he stormed out, and his defense attorney said, let me talk to Brian and see if he'll come around.
If there was to be an indictment and a trial, the district attorney's office needed one of the boys to come clean and acknowledge what he did.
It wasn't more than a few hours later, Brian Scully's defense counsel called up and said, hey, we want to come in. The next day, Brian Scully comes in with his counsel. He opens up to us at that point. Brian indicates to us that they start shouting at Luis Ramirez to go back to Mexico. This is Shendo, this is America, things along those lines. And there's also Scully telling us that Ramirez is being kicked while he's on the ground. So the next step is to reach out to the other teams at Donchak and Pekarsky. They say that they don't want to talk to us. Walsh eventually agrees to do the sit down, and Walsh confirms everything that Scully said.
Colin Walsh threw a punch, knocking Luis Ramirez down on the ground. And then Brandon Pekarsky kicked Luis Ramirez in the side of the head, and a large crack was heard.
So now we have an account that has booze, it has racial slurs, it has kicking. We filed our charges, and we alleged that Brandon Pekarsky was the individual that threw the final kick that led to the eventual death of Luis Ramirez.
That went off like a nuclear bomb. The thing that caught national attention pretty quickly was the nature of the assault involving a group of football players in an area where football was king.
There was some national attention, national sympathy for Luis Ramirez. But it was not local. The boys were the hometown heroes.
Attorneys for 17-year-old Brandon Pekarsky and 19-year-old Derek Donchek say their clients are not responsible for the death of Luis Ramirez, an illegal immigrant from Mexico. Prosecutors say the two teens brutally beat the 25-year-old who died 2 days later.
There was a huge divide in the community with, taking sides. They didn't do it. They didn't mean to. It was a fight. I feel like a lot of people wanted to kind of take the boys' side.
Some people took Brian telling his story to the DA as a good thing that he did. He's taking with the blame and he's telling the truth. Other people he's a rat. He's ratting on his friends.
We cannot just support the boys who are on trial and their families and let them know that we believe that the boys acted in self-defense.
And it was like a big secret. No one was allowed to suggest that there was a murder in town or anything like that. They had protests and shirts made up "Free the Boys," something like that.
they had a pretty good support system behind them. People wanted to push past it, and they wanted to see us still play football. They wanted to see the year go on.
The state trial starts late April of 2009. And, cases never go the way that you want them to go. But in this case, I would come home and talk to my wife and be like, the stuff that's happening in this case, that doesn't happen. Nothing like that could ever happen. And there I was, and it was happening.
Good people, united, we'll never be defeated. Luis Amigo.
It's nice to know that so many people care about something like this, and it shows people that things like this do happen and that something needs to be done about it.
There were national civil rights groups advocating on behalf of Latinos and Hispanics that immediately were concerned about the ramifications and the significance of the assault on Mr. Ramirez.
I hoped by going on TV, I hoped that more people would open up their eyes to the reality of it all. That people would come together, that things would get better as my children got older. During the trial, we had to listen to the 911 tapes, and I had to listen to how serious his injuries truly were, and that was very difficult for me. And then Brandon Pekarsky and Derek Dunchak acted like they weren't even sorry. They sat there and they giggled and they goofed off in the middle of the trial. It seemed like nobody truly cared what had happened. Nobody was affected by it. Nobody was bothered by it.
It got pretty tense during the trial. Everyone walked on eggshells, even in school and on the street. You had to watch what you said to everybody. Derek Dunchak and Brandon Pekarsky, they had support on their side from Shenandoah. A lot of people believed that he didn't do nothing wrong.
Brian Scully and Colin Walsh both decide to testify for the Commonwealth. There was a lot of reluctance that they didn't want to testify against their friends, but at the trial they testified that the teens are the ones that throw the first punch and initiate the attack. That Pekarsky threw the final kick to Ramirez's head.
The last day of the trial, it had gotten really late, and I had told my lawyer, I have to get home. My kids are at home. I have to let the babysitter leave.
Usually, when I am waiting for a verdict, I'm the only one waiting. I'm the only journalist waiting for it. It was much longer than usual. And there were a lot of other journalists there to talk with.
When the jury returned their verdict on May 2nd, 2009, they found the defendants not guilty of all the serious charges and only guilty of simple assault in relation to the beating incident.
Yes, I was right from the start. That's my comment. Thank God the jury listened.
It was a surreal experience when the verdict was read. The cheering, the clapping, the yelling, the hugging. It's hard enough when a not guilty comes back on such a serious case, but it was just magnified by the reaction that I heard. The human being was still dead. And that was hard. That was really hard.
I was sitting in my living room. My lawyer called me. She said, the verdict's read. And she said they were found not guilty. And I just broke down. I cried. I couldn't understand it for the life of me. It bothered me so much that people couldn't see all the facts in front of them and couldn't find them guilty. I didn't understand it. It made me feel like they all thought that Luis's life was garbage.
The simple assault conviction that Dunchak and Pekarsky got at the state level, that's 18 months they got for killing somebody. It clearly got the attention of the FBI. It clearly got the attention of the national press, and things end in a way that does not vindicate the federal interests. We're certainly going to be prepared to step in.
We had been in communication with the Department of Justice pretty much the whole time. And we knew that if a disfavorable verdict came out of the state court proceedings, that more likely than not, there was going to be a federal indictment.
At that point, I think the emphasis was on charging who needed to be charged for exactly what they did.
We initially started conducting our own parallel investigation and went from there. We started with Luis Ramirez's death, then branched out into a police corruption matter.
We want to elicit what happened from people who saw it, heard it, participated in it. We want to get at the truth.
When the FBI finally got involved, that gave me hope that something was actually going to be done, because I knew they were investigating the police officers that were involved, Officer Moyer, Officer Hayes, and Brandon McCarskey and Derek Dunchak. So I prayed with all my heart that we were going to get justice.
We're also cooperating with the district attorney's office because in order for us to build a case against the officers, we need to understand exactly what the officers told the DA's office, which was wrong, misleading, incorrect, false.
We basically had to re-interview everybody that had been interviewed. They have to swear that their statements are truth. Then it puts things in a whole new dimension for them. They realize that we're no longer in Schuylkill County or in the federal system.
The Shenandoah police claimed that when they reached the scene that they didn't know where the participants in the assault were.
The local police, at best, had conflicting loyalties.
We were able to show that Eddie Nye had in fact told the two officers on duty that night where the suspects were at. Unbeknownst to the police officers, their conversation with Eddie Nye got recorded onto the 911 recording line.
Mr. Nye was still on with the 911 operator when Lieutenant Moyer and Jason Hayes came into contact with Mr. Nye. You could hear the 911 operator saying to Mr. Nye, "Are you talking to the cops? Are the cops there with you?" Lieutenant Moyer agreed to come in for a voluntary interview. And we laid the 911 call for him. He says, "Hey, that's me." And we're like, "Yeah, we know." Well, you would think he's going to come clean and acknowledge what he did. That was not the case with Mr. Moyer. He continued to stick to his guns. It didn't do him any good in the end. I mean, it is what it is. His voice is on the recording.
When law enforcement breaks the law, they're just another criminal. When you pin a badge on, you're not authorized to commit criminal activity based on the fact you're a police officer.
I had trusted Officer Moyer before that because I had known him for so long, and he always seemed like a genuine person. And even when this all first happened with Luis, he seemed genuine to me. And to know that they were involved, it just destroyed my trust.
We would have been well within general practice to indict the cops along with Pekarsky and Donchak. But we didn't want what happened to Mr. Ramirez to get lost in a longer more difficult story to tell about what the officers did to corrupt the investigation. So we did them separately.
The most important thing about the federal trial of the football players, Donchak and Pekarsky, was focused entirely on the civil rights angle. They did not retry the homicide and assault charges.
Look, a racial epithet by itself is not a crime. You got to prove the motivation in the civil rights case.
Brandon Pekarsky and Derek Donchak were visibly shaking in crime with their faces in their hands when the guilty verdicts were read.
I cried a little bit, like tears of joy, but I was happy. I had hope that it was going to be a good verdict.
This time there was no parade, there was no, it was quiet. You weren't allowed to talk about it. Because they blamed the media for why the boys got jail time and police officers. Because they said if it wasn't the media, it would have went away. Right underneath the rug.
It wasn't just, one side versus another. It was a lot of sadness in our community. We lost our star football players at Shenandoah, damn, like these are, supposed to be my good friends, my teammates. And, how could they kind of do this, And how could, people that are supposed to protect us also in the same turn be, working kind of against us and trying to cover this up?
But the day the fight happened, I vividly remember the coaches saying to us, "Don't do nothing stupid this weekend." And everyone said, "Yes, sir." And to turn around a couple hours later to do something stupid. That literally affected the whole community.
I could say it changed now and everything else, but I watch at my park. You don't see a lot of mix. You don't see the blacks and the whites and the Hispanics all together. You see individual groups. They're not together.
To be without Luis is hard. Like, there are some days I don't know how to do it. Like, I'm sorry. I think about every Sunday when we used to take the kids out to eat breakfast. I think about how he used to play with the kids. I think about how it was to just spend time with him, to just sleep next to each other. I think about all those things. I wish I could have him longer.